Welcome to our channel, where today we're diving into the dramatic, larger-than-life stories of the infamous Apache Outlaws. The tales we'll be uncovering are filled with intense chases, gripping betrayals, daring escapes, and sheer survival. Let's start with this intriguing photograph. You see here, it captures 3 Apache scouts, warriors who played key roles during the Apache Wars, particularly in the campaign that led to the capture of Geronimo. In 1886, one of these men would receive the prestigious Medal of Honor, while 2 others would find themselves becoming outlaws, pursued by the very army they once served. Their stories, steeped in Old West legend, blood feuds, raids, prison escapes, and harrowing treks for survival. One of these stories even involves a dramatic escape from a train. If you're a fan of wild train escapes, buckle up. But before we dive into these sagas, I should mention that I'm passionate about researching fascinating pieces of history. I like to break these stories down in the same way I would share them with friends, making complex history engaging and relatable. If this type of content interests you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share. Your support not only helps the channel grow, but keeps history alive in an exciting way. Now, let's jump into the good stuff. Everyone loves a captivating outlaw story, especially when the characters are as complex as those we're discussing today. What makes these outlaws particularly compelling is that they weren't just cold-hearted criminals. They were once loyal scouts known as reservation Indians who helped the U.S. Army in their efforts to track down rebellious Apache bands. You see, the Apache were notorious raiders in the Southwest, often crossing the U.S.-Mexican border to plunder settlements. To counter these raids, the military employed Indian scouts, particularly Apache, whose tracking skills were second to none. Other tribes often avoided engaging with the Apache, fearing their prowess, but the U.S. Army quickly realized that to catch an Apache, they needed Apache scouts. Interestingly, many Apache men were eager to join these efforts. Life on the San Carlos Reservation, notoriously known as Hell's 40 Acres, was unbearable for many of these former warriors. They found it humiliating to be confined to farming, a far cry from their warrior lifestyle. So, when the opportunity came to put their skills to use as scouts, many jumped at the chance. In fact, 11 Apache scouts, including Rowdy the Man in our featured picture, would go on to receive medals of honor. General George Crook, a prominent figure in the campaigns against the Apache, famously declared, "There has never been any success in operations against these Indians unless Indian scouts were used." The collaboration was fruitful, but things didn't always remain peaceful. At the heart of today's discussion is the most infamous Apache outlaw, the Apache Kid. His name is synonymous with rebellion and resistance, and we'll come back to him in the next 2 stories. But first, let's shift our focus to Masai, another well-known Apache renegade. Masai was a Kurakawa Apache and one of the last of the outlaw Apache warriors. His life was marked by internal conflict. He constantly wavered between cooperating with the U.S. government and fighting against it. In the 1880s, Masai worked as a scout intermittently, but often found himself slipping away from reservation life, only to return when he grew tired of the dangers and isolation of life on the run. He would often help capture Apache renegades, some of whom he had once escaped with, an act that left him walking a fine line between ally and traitor. This double life caught up with him in 1886, when Geronimo and his last group of renegades were captured. Masai, who had been arrested along with them, was not seen as a harmless figure anymore. The army, frustrated by his duplicitous nature, decided to ship him off to Florida with Geronimo's group, viewing him as a dangerous element. And this is where Masai's story takes a dramatic turn. During the train ride to Florida, under mysterious circumstances, Masai managed to escape. Some versions of the story claim a guard warned the prisoners that those wearing red handkerchiefs, like the scouts, would be hanged upon arrival in Florida. Whether this was true or not, Masai didn't wait to find out. Together with his Tonkawa friend, Grey Lizard, Masai devised an escape plan. The 2 managed to loosen the bars on a window, and when the train slowed down to climb an uphill track, they seized their opportunity. They jumped from the train using a tuck and roll technique to avoid injury, and disappeared into the wilderness. Astonishingly, the guards either didn't notice their absence or assumed they had died in the fall. But Maasai and Grey Lizard's troubles were far from over. They had no food, little clothing, and were stranded over 12 miles from home in Missouri. Of all places, the two men began their long journey west, traveling by night and hiding during the day, with only the Dipper constellation to guide them. They hunted small game and foraged for roots to survive. Maasai's daughter later recounted that, at a critical moment, they stumbled upon a mining camp in the Ozark Mountains. The two outlaws stealthily waited until the workers entered the mines. Then they stole all the supplies they could carry: food, coffee, guns, ammunition, and knives. With weapons in hand, they were now better equipped to survive the long trek home. As they moved through Oklahoma and Texas, they encountered a familiar obstacle: the arid desert. Using a traditional Apache technique, they fashioned a water container from a deer's stomach to stay hydrated. However, their luck took a turn when Grey accidentally tore the water bag on a prickly pear cactus, dehydrated and on the verge of collapse. They prayed for rain, and in an extraordinary stroke of fortune, it came. The rain revived them, allowing them to continue their journey. By fall of 1887, after over a year and 12 miles of traveling, the two friends made it to New Mexico. Upon reaching the familiar landscapes of the Sierra Blanca and Mescalero Mountains, Maasai and Grey Lizard parted ways. Grey set off to find his family in the Mescalero Mountains, but he was never seen again. His fate remains a mystery to this day. Maasai, however, survived and became one of the most wanted Apache outlaws, a legend in his own right. But his story, like all great outlaw tales, is far from over. In our next installment, we'll unravel the fate of the notorious Apache Kid. Stay tuned for more thrilling tales from the Wild West. Following Geronimo's capture, another legendary figure rose among the Apache outlaws: Hosky Benny Dontal, widely known by American soldiers as the Apache Kid. Born around 1860, he belonged to the Western Apache tribe, and though his name has largely faded from public consciousness, his story remains one of the most intriguing and tragic tales of the Old West. Captured by the Yuma Indians as a child, the Apache Kid's early years were marked by hardship. Fortunately, he was freed by the U.S. Army in a twist of fate. Ended up staying around their camps. This is where he met Alcee, a renowned Army scout leader. Cyber quickly noticed the young boy's intelligence and potential. While many thought the boy was simply friendly and curious, Cyber saw deeper qualities: remarkable skill and ambition. By the time the kid reached his teenage years, Cyber had all but adopted him, mentoring him and shaping him into a formidable scout. In 1879, as a young man, the Apache Kid officially enlisted as a scout for the U.S. Army. Quickly distinguishing himself with his bravery and sharp mind, his meteoric rise in the ranks was undeniable, and within his first year, he was promoted. He soon became one of Cyber's most trusted men, taking part in significant campaigns, including efforts to capture Geronimo and battles against the Coyote and White Mountain Apache. While his achievements in the field earned him respect, the kid's gradual assimilation into American culture, including adopting American clothing, made him even more unique among his people. Dressing like an American wasn't unusual for the Apache. It was seen as a fashionable choice at the time. However, despite his success, the Apache Kid's story took a dark and irreversible turn when tragedy struck his family. His father, still living on the San Carlos reservation, was murdered in 1886, triggering a blood feud among the Apaches. Seeking vengeance was not merely a personal choice, but an obligation, a sacred duty. The man the kid believed responsible for his father's death was named Rip, and he had managed to evade capture. This was unacceptable to the Apache Kid, who knew that leaving this debt unpaid would dishonor his family. He first approached his mentor for permission to seek revenge, but was firmly denied, though deeply frustrated. The kid respected Cyber enough to refrain from immediately acting on his impulse. However, he didn't forget, and he didn't forgive. He waited for his moment. That moment came 6 months later, in May of 1887, when Cyber had to leave San Carlos for a time. The kid seized his opportunity, taking charge of the guardhouse in Cyber's absence. He tracked down Rip and killed him, fulfilling his cultural obligation to avenge his father's death. The Apache Kid knew this act would have severe consequences. When Seba returned and learned what had happened, he ordered the kid to turn himself in and face justice. The kid was torn. He had committed the murder to honor his family, but he also knew the army would now consider him an outlaw. After some negotiation and securing assurances that he would not be gunned down upon his return, the kid reluctantly agreed to surrender. In an ironic twist, the meeting between the Apache Kid and Seba took place in a public street, and it was anything but peaceful. Tensions flared, and someone in the crowd fired a gun. Whether it was friends of Rip seeking revenge on the kid or the kid's allies retaliating against the officers, no one knows for sure. What is clear is that Seba was caught in the crossfire. A bullet shattered his ankle, crippling him for life. The kid fled, knowing that Seba's trust and any chance at leniency had been destroyed. The bond between Seba and the Apache Kid was shattered once a mentor and father figure. Seba now harbored an unyielding grudge against the young Apache. Though the kid eventually surrendered again, hoping to clear his name, he was court-martialed and sentenced to death. Fate intervened, however, and the sentence was reduced to 10 years in prison. He was sent to the infamous Alcatraz prison in San Francisco. In a surprising turn of events, the Apache Kid's case underwent military review, and in 1888 it was found that his original trial had been prejudiced. As a result, the kid was released after serving just 1 year, returning to San Carlos, but the damage had been done. The once outgoing and ambitious scout was now disillusioned, bitter, and distrustful of the Americans. He retreated to the fringes of the territory, avoiding conflict, but his former mentor, Seba, was not done with him. Seba, still seething with resentment, pursued a legal vendetta against the kid, exploiting a new Supreme Court ruling that placed jurisdiction over Native American crimes back in the hands of territorial courts. Seba ensured the Apache Kid was retried, even though it was widely known that the kid had not fired the shot that injured Seba. The court sentenced him to 7 years in Yuma prison. However, fate had another twist in store. During the journey to Yuma, the Apache Kid was part of a prisoner group escorted by the treacherous route, known as Kelvin Grade, was steep and rain-soaked. The kid was kept inside the stagecoach, deemed too dangerous to walk like the other prisoners. Sensing an opportunity, the Apache prisoners ambushed the guards, overpowering them in a matter of moments. The stagecoach driver, Eugene Middleton, was shot in the face but miraculously survived, recounting later that the Apache Kid himself had spared his life despite his notorious reputation. The kid's actions that day revealed a complex character capable of mercy even in the face of violence. After the ambush, the Apache Kid vanished into the wilderness, evading capture for the remainder of his life. Although many claimed to have seen him and countless rumors circulated about his fate, the Apache Kid was never definitively found. Rewards for his capture soared as high as $5,000, a fortune in those days, but he remains one of the Old West's enduring mysteries, a ghost of the frontier whose final chapter was never written. The story of the Apache Kid and Maasai doesn't end with their escapes, nor is it limited to the 1890s. By the early 1900s, many believed that dozens, perhaps even hundreds of Apache were still hiding in the Sierra Madre Mountains. These hidden bands were referred to as Bronco Apaches by the Mexicans, a term used to describe those who had eluded capture for years, living in the rugged, unforgiving terrain. While Maasai's escape and the Apache Kid's flight from the law took place within just a few years of each other, the two men became legends, with dozens of unsolved crimes being attributed to them. However, how many of these were truly their doing is up for debate, as the historical record is murky. So what became of these two infamous renegades? The truth is shrouded in mystery, but rumors abound. As author Lee Paul noted in his insightful article, between 1890 and 1906, there were countless reports claiming the deaths of both Maasai and the Apache Kid. Figures like John Horton Slaughter, Walapi Clark, Jack Gansh, and Mickey Friel boasted of killing the Apache Kid, while a New Mexico posse claimed to have captured Maasai. The stories vary. One or the other was said to have been found dead in a cave, shot while riding through a cornfield, ambushed at a waterhole, or brought down by Mexican route. Yet despite these claims, no body was ever produced and no reward was collected. This lack of closure leaves room for some captivating stories. One particularly intriguing tale comes from Masai's own daughter. Around 19, Masai, accompanied by his wife and young child, was traveling north through the Sierra Madre. He had decided that life on the run was becoming too perilous, and though he couldn't settle on a reservation himself, he wanted to ensure his family's safety. However, their journey was interrupted when Masai noticed a cloud of dust rising from the trail behind them. Someone was following the relentless. Mexican rurales were hot on their trail. Acting quickly, Masai sent his family ahead while he stayed back, concealed behind a tree. It wasn't long before two Mexicans appeared. Without hesitation, Masai shot one of them, but the other managed to drag his wounded companion onto a horse and flee within hours. The rallies returned in force, scouring the mountains for Masai. They found him the next day, and he was shot dead. Interestingly, no one came forward to claim the reward for his death. Instead, according to reports, his captors decapitated him, built a large fire, and boiled his head. It's possible they didn't even realize who he was, or perhaps they intended to send a gruesome message. In Apache culture, mutilation was considered a terrible fate, worse than death itself, as it was believed that one would enter the afterlife in the same condition as they were buried. The Apache kid's fate is equally enigmatic. Many believe that his mother played a crucial role in his survival, leaving hidden caches of food, ammunition, and clothing in a cave for him to find. This practice of stashing supplies in remote locations was common among the Apache, who relied on such tactics to survive while on the run. The kid's sister claimed that he visited her regularly until 1896, when the visits suddenly stopped. Was he dead by then? Perhaps, but the mystery deepens with reports from 1899, when Mexican rurales claimed that the Apache kid was still alive and living peacefully in the Sierra Madre. As if that weren't enough, the kid's own nephew later claimed that he was alive and well in Sonora. 1924, further fueling speculation about his true fate. Even more astonishing, some reports suggest that the Apache visited friends at San Carlos as late as 1935, by which time he would have been around 75 years old. These sightings raise more questions than answers, leaving the door open to endless speculation about the true end of the Apache kid story. I hesitate to drag this series on longer than necessary, but there are more stories worth telling, particularly those about individuals captured by the Apache or tales of the last remaining Bronco Apaches who continued to resist assimilation. The Apache Kid and Masai stories are part of a larger, complex history of a people fighting to maintain their way of life, even as the world around them changed irrevocably. Thank you for watching this video, and for your interest in these fascinating chapters of Apache history. I hope you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any questions, thoughts, or suggestions for future videos, feel free to leave a comment below. Your feedback is always appreciated, and I look forward to diving into more captivating stories in future videos.